Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. My channel. The paper made a soft whispering sound against the wood, almost delicate, which somehow made it worse. Morning light from the floor-to-ceiling windows hit the heavy cream cardstock and turned the photograph on the front into something obscene. My grandmother's house. White limestone. Black iron balcony. The curved front steps I'd climbed with skinned knees and muddy sneakers for half my childhood. Across the bottom, in elegant serif letters, was a gold sticker that read "Sold." My father stood at the head of the conference table with one hand braced flat against the lacquered surface, the veins in his wrist raised and visible under the fluorescent edge lighting. My older brother Owen lounged in a leather chair to my right, one ankle propped on his knee, jaw working lazily like he was chewing the scene before swallowing it. Bernard Klein, the family attorney, kept adjusting his silver cuff links and not looking at me. And standing by the glass wall near the espresso console were the buyers, Adrian and Paula Wexler, stiff in expensive coats, exchanging the kind of uncomfortable glances people use when they realize they may have wandered into someone else's disaster. "You will stop contacting the broker," my father said. His voice was low, but not controlled. There was a crackle underneath it, anger with panic braided through it. My mother, Celeste Mercer, smoothed the brochure with the edge of her hand, fingers perfectly manicured, diamond bracelet flashing like a blade. "And you will stop embarrassing this family with these delusions." I looked at the brochure again. Sold. Not listed. Not pending. Sold. The air left my lungs so fast it felt like I'd been hit. Then Bernard cleared his throat and pushed a stapled packet toward me. "If you sign this acknowledgement, we can avoid escalating matters." "Avoid what matters?" I asked. My brother gave a short laugh through his nose. "Don't do that. Don't act confused. You've been calling title offices, making threats, telling people Mom and Dad stole your inheritance. You sound unstable." Unstable. There it was. Not just betrayal. Strategy. My name is Lila Mercer. I'm 32. And this is the story of how my parents sold my inheritance behind my back, only to discover that the one thing they couldn't sell was the one thing that destroyed them. I remember every detail of that room, because shock has a way of sharpening surfaces. The steel carafe near Bernard's elbow. The faint citrus smell of the cleaning solution on the glass. My mother's cream silk blouse, tucked so precisely into her camel skirt that it looked armor-plated. My father's charcoal suit jacket hanging open, one hand on his hip, thumb hooked into his waistband like a man already claiming victory. Owen's loosened tie, his smirk, his fingers tapping 1, 2, 3 against the armrest like heels striking tile in a metronome beat. "You contacted Hollis Title at 8:13 yesterday morning," Bernard said, flipping to the second page without meeting my eyes. "You represented yourself as a controlling beneficiary and requested a hold." "I am a controlling beneficiary." My mother laughed then. A light social laugh, the kind she used at charity luncheons when someone said something vulgar over salad forks. "No, darling. You were given a sentimental bequest. A few personal items. Your grandfather made that clear." "Did he?" Her eyes sharpened. "Don't be insolent." Paula Wexler shifted by the window, one gloved hand tightening around the handle of her handbag. Adrian lifted his chin toward Bernard. "I was told all family objections had been resolved." "They have," my father said quickly. "My daughter is going through a difficult period. She's emotional. She had unrealistic expectations." I turned to look at him fully then. He held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds before his eyes slid away to the view beyond the glass wall, where the city shimmered pale and indifferent in the late morning haze. That was the first real sign. My father had spent my entire life teaching people that direct eye contact was power. When he stopped holding mine, I knew this had gone much deeper than a property sale. "What difficult period?" I asked. Owen leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "Do you really want to do this here?" "I'm fine doing it here." He smiled without warmth. "Good. Then let's be honest. You've been living off some fantasy that Granddad was going to hand you the Mercer portfolio because you brought him soup and listened to his old war stories. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad kept this family afloat. They managed the estate. They paid the taxes. They cleaned up the mess. You're upset because you found out there was never anything for you to control." My mother gave the smallest nod, as if he'd performed well. Then she reached into her handbag, drew out another document, and placed it in front of me with exquisite care. "And before you start another scene, Here is your signature. On the consent. I looked down. There it was. My name in dark blue digital ink. Lila and Mercer. Dated 5 months earlier. For a moment the room went silent in that thick, physical way silence sometimes does, like a heavy cloth being pulled over furniture. I stared at the signature. My signature. The looping L. The narrow slash through the A. The compressed final R I developed in college because I was always signing too many internship forms too quickly. You signed your approval, Bernard said. Voluntarily. And if you continue interfering, my father added, each word clipped now, we will be forced to take formal action for defamation and financial sabotage. There it was. The trap springing shut. Publicly corner me. Produce forged consent. Recast me as erratic. Scare the buyers. Force me into silence, or make me look hysterical in front of witnesses who mattered. It was good. I'll give them that. It was cleaner than I expected. My mother folded her hands and looked at me with that composed expression she wore when delivering bad news to interns and caterers. Lila, this obsession is beneath you. Sign the acknowledgement. Stop making calls. Take the jewelry your grandmother left you and move on. I could hear the faint hiss of the espresso machine, warming on standby behind the Wexlers. Bernard's pen clicked once. Owen sat back, already bored, like vultures losing interest once the animal stopped kicking. I lifted the forged consent in both hands and studied it for another long beat. Then I set it back down carefully. No, I said. Owen exhaled hard. For God's sake. You don't understand your position, Bernard said. I understand it perfectly. My father straightened. Then stop this. Now. I reached into my bag, took out the stainless steel water bottle I'd brought from the car, unscrewed the lid, and took a slow drink while all of them watched me. Deliberate slowness is a beautiful thing. It forces frantic people to sit inside their own noise. I recapped the bottle, laid it beside the brochure, and looked first at the Wexlers, then at Bernard, then finally at my parents. Please continue the closing, I said calmly. I'd actually prefer all of this on the record. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's fingers froze against her bracelet. Owen's mouth parted. Bernard blinked. And in the polished reflection of the table, I watched my father's confidence crack for the first time. Because the truth was, by then, I already knew almost everything. I had known for 11 weeks. The first clue had been small. My grandmother's silver tea service disappeared from inventory. Not from the house itself, from the estate register. A simple omission. Line item removed between 2 versions of a PDF Bernard had sent me after I requested updated holdings from the Mercer Family Trust. When I asked about it, I got 3 different answers in 48 hours. My mother said it had gone to appraisal. Bernard said it had been reclassified as household decor. Owen said he thought I'd taken it. The second clue came 3 days later, when I stopped by my grandfather's old office at Mercer House and found the lower file drawer unlocked. My father was never careless about locks. Never. Inside were empty hanging folders with fresh label ghosts where older tags had been peeled away. Trust amendments. Mineral rights. Voting agreements. Originals removed. After that, I stopped asking questions out loud. I smiled at family dinners. I let Owen bait me. I thanked Bernard for his updates. I listened to my mother tell mutual friends that I seemed lost since Granddad died. I let them think I was grieving and disorganized and a little too sentimental to notice numbers changing in quiet places. Then I started building my own file. I requested visitor logs from Halstead Private Bank under the pretext of locating my grandmother's pearls. I called the county recorder's office and asked for certified copies of deed transfers. I paid for metadata recovery on every PDF Bernard had emailed me that year. I spent 3 late nights with a forensic document specialist named Marina Pope, who wore matte black glasses and spoke in the flat, precise tone of someone who enjoyed facts more than people. By the end of the first week, Marina had confirmed that the consent carrying my digital signature had been generated from a DocuSign template created on a desktop registered to Mercer Strategic Holdings. My father's company, not the trust. By the second week, I knew the limestone house in Brookhaven had been sold below market to an LLC called Rowan Gate Properties. By the third, I knew Rowan Gate's registered agent shared office space with Owen's failed development startup in Midtown. By the fourth, I knew my mother had personally authorized removal of 3 paintings, 2 antique clocks, and a collection of first-edition law books from the library before the sale ever went public. And by the 5th week, I learned the part that made me stop sleeping. The house was only the beginning. They weren't liquidating one property. They were hollowing out the estate. Antique Holdings, a land parcel in Charleston, 2 commercial units in Savannah, a private debt note my grandfather had bought 20 years earlier and kept off the family's gossip radar. Anything that could be quietly assigned, sold, or leveraged, they were touching. They moved through the assets like moths through old wool, slowly enough that no one noticed the damage until the shape started collapsing. At first, I thought greed was the whole story. It wasn't. Debt was. Owen's tech venture had burned through cash like dry paper. My father had guaranteed part of a bridge loan without telling anyone. Then there were margin calls, a failed hotel conversion project in Palm Beach, personal lines of credit secured against future trust distributions they were never legally entitled to touch. My mother had been writing checks from 3 accounts to cover obligations in 2 others, floating the family name on layers of polished fraud. The Mercers had not sold my inheritance because they wanted a better life. They sold it because the one they had built was rotting from the inside. Back in that conference room, I watched the 4 of them waiting for me to break. Instead, I opened my tote, took out my iPad, and woke the screen with my thumb. "Lila," Bernard said, a warning threaded into his voice, "put that away." "No." My father's jaw tightened. "This is not a negotiation." "You're right," I said evenly. "It's closer to disclosure." I turned the iPad toward the Wexlers first. On the screen was a blown-up excerpt from the deed chain for Brookhaven House. Beneath it sat the trust schedule. Beneath that was a highlighted provision from a document dated 9 years earlier. Adrian Wexler stepped closer despite himself. Paula followed. "The property you're buying," I said, "is held by the Mercer Legacy Preservation Trust, not by Richard and Celeste Mercer individually. Any transfer requires the written consent of the trust protector." Bernard snapped, "That has been obtained." I tilted the screen. "No. What you obtained was a forged e-signature generated from a corporate workstation at 11:42 p.m. on March 12th. I was on Delta Flight 2871 to Seattle at 11:42 p.m. on March 12th. I still have the boarding pass. And airport security has my timestamp." Owen sat up, so fast his knee hit the underside of the table. Bernard's face lost a shade of color. I swiped to the next screen. "Second, Rowan Gate Properties is not an unrelated buyer. It is tied through registered agency and financing channels to Mercer Development Ventures, which means this was structured self-dealing. The discount price alone is enough to trigger review." My mother's voice came out brittle. "You're making wild inferences." "Not really." Another swipe. Emails. Dates. A chain between Owen and a broker named Neil Harrow discussing family resistance and papering beneficiary consent. Owen went still. Not frozen. Worse. That rigid stillness people get when their body knows before their face does that they've been found out. Then I scrolled one more time. "And third," I said. Hollis' title did not receive a vague complaint from an emotional daughter yesterday morning. They received a litigation preservation notice from Julian Cross at Cross and Vale, along with notice that transfer of trust assets without valid protector authorization constitutes fiduciary breach, fraud, and potentially criminal conversion. This time Bernard actually sat down. The leather chair gave a soft groan beneath him. My father stared at me, and I watched calculation flash behind his eyes in quick, ugly bursts. Denial. Recalibration. Fury. "Who the hell is Julian Cross?" Owen said. "My attorney." My mother scoffed, but the sound came thin. "Since when do you have an attorney?" "Since the first time you lied to my face." My father slapped a hand against the table. "You hired a lawyer over a misunderstanding." "Actually," I said, and my voice was so quiet that everyone leaned in to hear it, "you were committing estate fraud." That sentence changed the temperature in the room. It was visible. A pressure drop. Paula Wexler took a full step away from the table. Adrian tugged at his cuff, then at his collar, as if the air had gotten smaller. Bernard removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Owen looked at my father instead of me, which was all the confirmation I needed about who had been driving which parts of this. My mother was the first to reach for hauteur again. She drew herself upright, chin lifted, shoulders locked. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Your grandfather intended this family to be managed responsibly. He did, I said. That's exactly why he wrote the amendment. No one spoke. I let that settle over the table. Then I reached into my bag a second time and placed a small brass key on the wood between us. Old, dull in places from use. A Mercer crest cut into the bow. Bernard looked at it first. His pupils widened. My father's face went blank. Not angry blank. Not confused blank. The kind of blank that only happens when a person sees a weapon they forgot existed. That, Bernard said slowly. Where did you get that? My grandfather gave it to me in person 8 months before he died, I said. Deposit box 4018 at Halstead Private Bank. He told me not to use it unless I had no other choice. Owen frowned. It's a key. No, Bernard whispered, more to himself than anyone else. No, no, no. I turned the key once under my fingertips, listening to its small scrape against the table's lacquer. It opens the box holding the original founder's share certificate, the handwritten codicil, and the sealed letter of appointment naming me trust protector upon my 30th birthday. Not sentimental, Mom. Structural. My mother's hand went to her throat. The gold in her bracelet flashed under the fluorescent light, quick as a warning siren. You're lying, she said. Then keep going with the closing. My father's voice came out low and dangerous. Lila! I met his eyes. Dad! He knew. In that instant, he knew exactly what I had, how much of the architecture I understood, and why the room had tilted under his feet. Because property can be sold, paintings can be moved, accounts can be drained. Control is different, and the one thing my grandfather had never trusted them with was control. The Wexlers were already gathering their things. Paula didn't even try to hide it. Adrian turned to Bernard. We were not informed of any of this. Bernard swallowed. This can still be clarified. With our counsel, Adrian said sharply. Of course, I said. My mother stood, so suddenly her chair legs scraped the floor. You manipulative little. Careful, I said. She stopped. That was new for both of us. I slid the brochure back across the table to her. You should keep this. It may become evidence. Then I rose, tucked my iPad under my arm, picked up the brass key, and looked at Bernard. Tell your malpractice carrier you'll need to make a call before noon. I turned to leave. Behind me I heard Owen start. Lila, wait. Then stop when my father snapped his name in a tone I had only ever heard him use with employees he was about to fire. At the glass door, I paused long enough to look back once. My family had always been beautiful in public. Expensively dressed. Smooth-edged. Impossible to read unless you knew where to look. Now I knew where to look. At Bernard's trembling hands. At my mother's rigid shoulders. At the sheen of sweat breaking across Owen's upper lip. At my father's stare fixed not on me, but on the empty space where the brass key had been. See you Thursday, I said calmly, because by then Julian had already scheduled the emergency conference at Barlow Finch. They thought they had sold my inheritance. They had no idea the only thing that mattered had never been on their inventory. The next 2 days moved with the cold efficiency of a surgical team. Julian Cross was not theatrical. That was one of the reasons I hired him. He had a neat, unremarkable office on the 14th floor of a limestone building off Madison, brushed steel lamps, shelves organized by practice area, and the kind of still face that made anxious people talk too much in front of him. He was 46, broad-shouldered, impeccably restrained, and wore navy suits that looked plain until you noticed the stitching. The first time we met, he listened to my entire explanation without interrupting, then asked for 3 things: originals, dates, and proof of motive. Not feelings, not family history, not grief. Proof of motive. By the time I left his office that first afternoon, he'd assigned a forensic accountant, an investigator, and a probate litigator to the matter. He'd also looked up from my grandfather's trust amendment and said, "Your grandfather was smarter than they were." That's helpful. On Tuesday evening, Marisol Dane, Julian's investigator, called to tell me they had confirmed unauthorized access requests at Halstead Private Bank, 2 of them made by Bernard's office. On Wednesday morning, Marina delivered the metadata report on the forged documents. On Wednesday afternoon, Hollis title froze the closing pending resolution. By Wednesday night, 1 more person had entered the story. Her name was Claire Baines. I had known of Claire in the vague, polished way daughters know the women orbiting powerful fathers. please subscribe my channel. She was younger than my mother by 15 years, always well-dressed, always somehow present near charity galas, investor dinners, and holiday events where family friends appeared without ever being formally introduced. She had chestnut hair, a cool English accent softened by years in New York, and a talent for looking amused in rooms full of people working hard to look important. I did not know, until Wednesday night, that she had been my father's mistress for 3 years. I learned that because she emailed Julian from a private address at 9:14 p.m. with the subject line, "He plans to blame me." Julian called me at 9:22. "Can you speak?" he asked. "Yes. We may have a cooperative witness." Claire met us the next morning at a cafe in Tribeca with marble counters, bentwood chairs, and the pale gold light of a rainy spring morning pressed against the windows. She arrived in a camel coat, no visible jewelry, and the face of a woman who had not slept. Not tear-streaked, not wrecked, just sharpened down to essentials. She set her phone on the table between us and said, "Richard used my LLC." Julian didn't react. "For what?" he asked. "To route deposits tied to Rowan Gate and 2 of the Savannah units." He told me it was temporary. Then yesterday I received a draft email from Bernard's assistant naming me as an independent consultant who exceeded her authority. He means to throw me under a bus and reverse over me twice. I studied her. She didn't fidget, didn't reach for the cappuccino she'd ordered. One hand remained flat beside the phone, fingers straight, nails short and unpainted. Anger without vanity. That I respected. "Why help me?" I asked. Her eyes met mine. "Because your father mistakes discretion for loyalty. And because last month I heard him say, very clearly, that if this ever went bad, he'd let the little fool take the fall." He was referring to me. Julian nodded once. "What do you have?" She unlocked the phone and slid it toward him. Texts, voice notes, a photograph of a spreadsheet on Richard's desk, a forwarded thread where Bernard discussed sanitizing the beneficiary angle. Claire had not known all of what she was looking at when she saved it. She knew enough, though. Enough to sense she was close to the blast radius. When she mentioned my mother, her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Celeste knew about me. Not at first, but eventually. After that, the 2 of them stopped pretending morality had anything to do with their decisions. There it was. Not a love triangle. A coalition. That explained more than I wanted explained. By Thursday morning, Barlow Finch's 42nd floor conference suite smelled faintly of polished walnut, coffee, and expensive carpet. The reception area opened into a long room lined with abstract art in muted blues. The conference table itself was a dark oval of gleaming wood under warm recessed lights, surrounded by black leather chairs that muffled movement. The whole space had the curated hush of authority, like a museum for consequences. I arrived 5 minutes early in a charcoal dress, hair tied back, my grandfather's old watch on my wrist. Julian stood at the far end of the room reviewing a slim binder with Priya Shah, the forensic accountant. Priya wore a deep green blazer, hair pinned into a low knot, and spoke in clipped, surgical sentences even when discussing the weather. Marisol leaned against the credenza by the water service, flipping through a legal pad. Claire sat near the windows, composed in navy silk, looking out over the river as if she had already chosen survival. At 10:01, my parents arrived with Owen and Bernard. They did not enter the room the way they had entered rooms all my life. My father still tried. He came in first, shoulders square, chin set, suit immaculate. But there was strain in the speed of his breathing and a tightness around the eyes that no tailoring could hide. My mother followed beside him in pearl gray wool, posture flawless, face drained of most of its usual color. Owen's swagger was gone entirely. He tugged at his cuff repeatedly, as though he couldn't get comfortable inside his own skin. Bernard looked 20 years older than he had on Monday. Then he saw Claire. He stopped moving. My father turned, followed Bernard's gaze, and saw her too. The silence that hit the room then was clean and hard, like a glass pane sliding into place. Claire didn't stand. She only crossed one leg over the other and folded her hands in her lap. "Good morning, Richard," she said. My father's face changed in stages. First disbelief, then rage, then the rapid inward clench of someone counting implications. My mother looked from Claire to him and back again with a slowness that said she had suspected everything and still hated the proof. Julian stepped in before anyone spoke. "Please, everyone, sit." No one wanted to take the first chair. That amused me more than it should have. Eventually they did. My father to Julian's left, my mother beside him, Owen across from me, Bernard at the far end, already opening a folder with trembling fingers. The leather creaked. Water glasses clicked softly against coasters. Outside the windows the sky hung silver over the city, and the river below looked like brushed metal. Julian remained standing. "My client," he said, requested this meeting before filing for emergency injunctive relief, civil damages, accounting, fiduciary removal, and criminal referral. Consider that a courtesy. My father laughed once, without humor. "Your client is my daughter." "Yes," Julian said. "That makes your conduct more interesting, not less actionable." Priya distributed packets down each side of the table. Tabbed, indexed, color-coded. I watched my mother's fingers hesitate before touching hers. Julian continued, "We're going to proceed in 3 parts. First, asset status. Second, document integrity. Third, exposure and resolution." My father leaned back. "This is absurd." Julian didn't even look at him. "Page 1. No one moved. Priya said, "Page 1, please." There was authority in her voice that did not need volume. Paper began to shift. "Brookhaven House," Julian said, "held by the Mercer Legacy Preservation Trust. Scheduled sale price, $6.2 million. Estimated market value, $7.8. Buyer vehicle, Rowan Gate Properties. Rowan Gate shares management address with Mercer Development Ventures, founded by Owen Mercer. That relationship was not disclosed. Owen opened his mouth. Priya spoke over him. Page 2. Savannah Commercial Units. Quietly marketed through Harrowstone Realty under authority letters unsupported by valid trust powers. Page 3. Charleston Marsh parcel subject to mineral rights rider retained under the 2017 amendment. Attempted assignment discussed in internal email dated February 3rd. Page 4. Art relocation log. 3 pieces removed from Brookhaven before closing without beneficiary notice. My mother found her voice first. "This is a distortion of ordinary estate management." Julian slid a single sheet across the table toward her. "Then perhaps you can explain why ordinary estate management required a fabricated consent bearing your daughter's signature." Bernard stiffened. "There is no proof of fabrication. Marina wasn't there, but her report was." Priya opened to the next tab. "Device origin, template creation, IP pathway, timestamp mismatch, and signature layer analysis are all attached. The eSign artifact was created on a Mercer Strategic Workstation at 11:42 p.m. on March 12th. Ms. Mercer's physical location at that time is independently verified through airline, airport, and hotel records." Bernard's lips parted, closed, opened again. Then came the timeline. This was Marisol's part. She stood, walked to the display screen, and clicked the remote. A chronology appeared. Simple. White background. Black text. Dates marching downward in orderly rows like soldiers. "January 12th, she said. Richard Mercer meets broker Neil Harrow at Clementi Grill regarding off-market valuation of Brookhaven House. January 19th, Celeste Mercer requests duplicate estate inventory from Bernard Klein's office. February 3rd, internal email accelerating dispositions before Lila becomes difficult. February 14th, draft power language circulated lacking trust protector signature line. March 2nd, Rowan Gate Properties formed. March 8th, Claire Baines's LLC receives deposit transfer tied to holding expenses. March 12th, false consent created. March 20th, artwork removed. April 9th, Hollis title begins preliminary search. May 5th, Owen Mercer circulates financing memo referencing post-closing bridge relief. She clicked once more. Then the final line appeared. May 11th, Marisol said. Richard Mercer states in voice note, quote, "If she keeps poking around, Bernard can make it look like she signed and forgot." No one at the table breathed. My father turned slowly toward Bernard. Bernard did not look back. Claire's expression didn't change. She only lifted her water glass and took one measured sip. The room held for a second, then broke open. "That was private," my father snapped. Claire set the glass down with a tiny click. "So was I." My mother hissed his name. "Richard." Owen shoved back from the table. This is insane. You recorded him. You brought her here. I didn't bring her, I said quietly. He did. That landed. Owen looked at me, then at his father, and some part of the scaffolding inside him finally gave way. Dad, tell me you didn't say that. My father didn't answer fast enough. That was answer enough. Then the group started to fracture, exactly the way cracked ice does. Not all at once, but in branching lines. My mother turned on Bernard. You told us the documents were sufficient. Bernard jerked upright. I said they were sufficient if consent was authentic. Owen looked at him wildly. You reviewed them. I reviewed what your father gave me. My father, Owen repeated, voice rising. So this is all his fault now? Richard slammed a palm onto the table. Sit down. Owen didn't. That too was new. Julian let them turn on each other for a full 10 seconds. Sometimes the cleanest evidence isn't on paper. It's in panic. Then he stepped forward and placed a slim cream envelope in the center of the table. Before anyone decides to lie again, he said, there is one more matter. He opened the envelope and removed a folded document sealed with the embossed crest of Halstead Private Bank. I knew what it was. I had seen it 2 nights earlier when Julian and I opened deposit box 4018 under witness protocol. Still, seeing it laid there in that room made my pulse slow and deepen, as if my grandfather himself had entered. Julian unfolded it carefully. Thick paper, blue-black ink, my grandfather's handwriting in the margins. Original letter of instruction from Thomas Mercer, Julian said, referencing the enclosed class of founders' share certificate and codicil to the Mercer Legacy Preservation Trust. My mother whispered, No. Julian continued, under the codicil, control authority over strategic trust dispositions passes to Lila Mercer upon her 30th birthday, which was 18 months ago. The appointment was concealed from her through the withholding of original documents. Additionally, the founder's share carries veto rights over transfers involving core legacy properties. He laid the share certificate beside the letter. Cream stock, gold border, Mercer Holdings crest. My father stared at it like a man watching a grave open. This isn't possible, he said. It's inconvenient, Julian corrected. I rested my fingertips on the edge of the table. Smooth wood, cool under my skin. Granddad told me you'd look everywhere except where it actually mattered. He was right. My father's eyes snapped to mine. You hid this. I protected it. You let this go on. I wanted you to build a record. Owen stared at me. You knew. Yes. How long? Long enough. He sat back down as though his legs had stopped taking instructions. My mother's voice turned thin and jagged. You set us up. That was the most honest sentence she'd said all week. I looked at her. Really looked. At the pearls sitting sharp against the hollow of her throat. At the impeccable blowout. At the tiny white half-moons where she'd pressed her nails into her own palm under the table. At the tiny white half-moons where she'd pressed her nails into her own palm under the table. My mother had spent years teaching me that power belonged to the person who never looked messy. But underneath her control was the oldest fear in the world, being seen clearly. No, I said. You set yourselves up. I just made sure you'd find exactly what I wanted you to find. Claire's mouth tilted slightly at that. Bernard stood abruptly. I need separate counsel. Smart, Marisol murmured. Owen turned on my father again. Did you use my company because it was convenient, or because you thought I'd be too stupid to notice? My father's composure finally cracked. You already burned through everything I put into you. The words hung there. Ugly. Unplanned. True enough to wound. Owen's face went white. My mother shut her eyes briefly, as if the room had begun spinning and she was trying not to let it show. Julian didn't raise his voice when he resumed. He didn't need to. Here is where we are. My client can file by 3 p.m. today. If she does, the petition will seek immediate injunctive relief freezing trust-related transfers, appointment of a neutral fiduciary, full accounting, rescission of unauthorized sales, disgorgement of diverted proceeds, referral to the district attorney's financial crimes unit, and notice to every buyer, broker, lender, and board on record. He placed a second document packet on the table. Or, he said, you can cooperate. No one reached for it. Priya slid it an inch closer to my father with one manicured finger. Term sheet. He glanced down. My mother read over his shoulder, lips moving. Owen leaned across from the other side. Bernard remained standing, hands flattened against the table. Julian began listing terms with the same calm tone he might have used to describe weather patterns. Full rescission effort regarding Brookhaven. Immediate admission of disputed title to halt closing. Transfer of all original trust documents to neutral review within 24 hours. Resignation of Richard and Celeste Mercer from all fiduciary and managerial estate-related roles. Return of removed personal property. Disclosure of all encumbered assets and debts touching trust expectation. Reimbursement of investigative and legal costs. Non-disparagement. No contact with my client except through counsel for 90 days. And if we refuse, my father said. Julian met his eyes. Then I make sure the public filings are educational. My mother looked up sharply. You would destroy this family. I almost laughed. Instead, I said no. I'm just declining to protect the version of it that was built on theft. She flinched harder at that than she had at any threat of litigation. Richard set the term sheet down. You think because you found one old share certificate you can erase 30 years of work. No, I said. I think I can stop you from stealing another 30. He leaned back, and for the first time in my entire life, he looked old to me. Not dignified, not established. Old. A man who had spent so long being obeyed, he had forgotten what happened when other people gathered proof. Julian nodded toward the signature lines. You have 15 minutes. No one spoke for a while after that. Outside the windows, a helicopter crossed the river in the distance, tiny against the gray sky. The HVAC system hummed softly above us. Someone in the hallway laughed at something unrelated, the sound absurdly normal. I watched them read. Watched Owen realize the self-dealing meant exposure far beyond a family fight. Watched Bernard calculate disciplinary proceedings. Watched my mother pause over the clause restricting contact with me, as if even now she thought access to my conscience was a usable asset. Watched my father reach the reimbursement term and swallow hard. Then, unexpectedly, my mother turned to Claire. How much did she promise you? Claire held her gaze. Less than he did. But she meant it. That was almost generous. My father pulled out a pen. The movement was abrupt enough to make the chair shift backward on the carpet. Richard, my mother whispered. We do this now, he said through his teeth. Or we do it in public. Owen dragged a hand over his mouth. I want my own attorney. You can get one after you stop bleeding on my client's timeline, Julian said. Owen actually looked as if he might argue. Then he looked at the projected chronology still frozen on the display screen, at his own company's name nestled inside the transaction trail, and thought better of it. Bernard sat back down slowly. I sign nothing without notation. Julian nodded. Notate. Sign. The next few minutes were almost disappointingly plain. No screaming. No overturned chairs. No melodramatic confession. Just signatures. One by one. Ink moving across thick paper under warm recessed light. My father signed first, hand steady by force. My mother second, pausing before the final stroke of her name as if she could still outweigh reality. Owen third, his signature jagged and unfamiliar. Bernard last, after adding a reservation of rights that Julian had clearly expected. When the final packet was gathered, Julian slid the originals to Priya, who placed them into a black portfolio with the care of a woman sealing evidence into airtight containers. And just like that, it was over. Not the whole war, but the battle that mattered most. They had come in expecting to intimidate me. They left having signed their own removal. My father stood. You've made your point. I rose too. No. I made a record. His eyes narrowed. I could feel everyone in the room waiting for the last line, the dramatic flourish, the emotional release. But revenge is often most satisfying when it arrives wearing an indoor voice. So I picked up my grandfather's watch from where I had set it on the table, fastened it back around my wrist, and said, You always told me legacy was about stewardship. It turns out you were right. Then I walked out. The next few days were a blur of sealed boxes, court-prepared contingencies that never needed filing, halted transfers, and the quiet administrative violence that follows exposed fraud. By Monday, Brookhaven House was officially off the market. By Wednesday, the paintings were recovered from climate storage in Long Island City. By Friday, a neutral fiduciary had been appointed for interim review, and every trust-connected institution in the chain had received notice. Once the paperwork began moving, it moved fast. That's the thing about structures built on prestige. They look permanent until the right people start checking the footings. 3 months later, I woke up in my own apartment with the early sun lying in long gold strips across white oak floors. It was the first morning in years that I opened my eyes without the sensation of bracing first. My new place sat on the top floor of a renovated pre-war building in Brooklyn Heights. Nothing enormous, nothing ostentatious, just clean lines, pale plaster walls, black-framed windows, a narrow balcony with terracotta planters, and a kitchen where the marble had enough gray veining to look interesting without trying too hard. I made coffee in a steel mocha pot my grandfather once used on fishing weekends, carried the cup outside, and stood in the clear warmth of the morning while the city slowly came awake below me. Fresh starts are rarely cinematic while you're living them. They're usually quiet, a clean mug, an unlocked jaw, the absence of dread. I had learned to value quiet. The karmic justice, when it came, did not arrive in one thunderclap. It arrived as a ledger. Richard Mercer resigned from 3 boards in 6 weeks. Officially 4, health and family reasons. Unofficially, because 2 institutions had no appetite for a man whose name kept appearing in memos containing phrases like concealed authority, false consent, and self-dealing. His Palm Beach hotel conversion died when lenders re-evaluated exposure. The country club he'd spent 20 years treating as his private annex stopped seating him near the terrace on Saturdays. Men who once slapped his back at fundraisers began touching his elbow with careful sympathy, which he hated more than outright contempt. Celeste Mercer lost more quietly and more completely. My mother had built her life out of curation, homes arranged to the inch, guest lists balanced with surgical precision, philanthropic committees that functioned as social tribunals in couture. Once the story spread in whispers, then in better whispers, then in the polished half-language of society columns that never quite name the offense but make sure everyone smells the smoke, invitations dried up. The Brookhaven Preservation Gala replaced her as chair. The museum board moved her to honorary emeritus, which is wealthy woman exile wrapped in embossed stationery. Friends still sent flowers on her birthday. Fewer of them called. Owen suffered the most publicly because he had the least practice wearing humiliation well. Mercer Development Ventures was audited, then restructured, then quietly cannibalized into something smaller by people with steadier hands and less family protection. He lost the office with the glass corner and ended up in a shared executive suite on a lower floor, still employed in technical terms, but diminished. His old confidence had depended on borrowed altitude. Once the altitude disappeared, so did the voice. Bernard Klein entered what Julian dryly called a season of professional inconvenience. His firm did not disbar him, but it distanced itself with impressive speed. He was moved off legacy clients. The bar inquiry stayed confidential, but the profession is a chandelier made of gossip. Touch one crystal, and the whole structure hums. He sent Julian 3 letters through counsel attempting to reframe his role as negligent rather than complicit. That told me everything I needed to know. Even Neil Harrow, the broker, caught fallout. Not catastrophic, just enough to sting. The kind of reputation bruise that lingers in boardrooms and private listings. He had failed to ask enough questions around a discounted off-market transfer involving a complicated family dynamic. After that, people stopped calling him discreet and started calling him sloppy. I never answered a single message from any of them. The texts came in waves. From my mother, "Can we please speak like adults? You have misunderstood so much." From my father, "Call me before this goes any further." From Owen, late one night, "You could have warned me." Then later, from my mother again, "I miss you." The family isn't the same. That one sat on my screen for a long time. Not because I was tempted to reply, because of the craftsmanship of it. No apology, no admission, just nostalgia deployed as leverage, soft as velvet over steel. I archived it with the others. There were voicemails too. My father's clipped and furious at first, then clipped and strategic, then finally clipped and tired. My mother's measured, almost tender, as if tone alone could revise history. Owen's were the most honest because he was the least disciplined. He veered between blame and self-pity so sharply it would have been comical if it weren't so exhausting. I saved everything to a folder titled Mercer Aftermath and never listened twice. Work changed too. Not immediately. At first I just handled cleanup, document review, meetings with fiduciaries, insurance conversations, appraisals, title corrections. But somewhere in the middle of that long administrative storm, people started getting referred to me. A friend of Julian's had a client whose brothers were stripping a family trust through temporary loans. Priya knew a woman in Connecticut whose stepfather had been rewriting distributions through shell foundations. Marisol sent over a case involving a missing art inventory and an executor with a gambling problem. I helped one person, then another. By the end of the summer, I had founded Mercer Advisory, not on the family name as inheritance, but on the family name as warning label. We specialized in beneficiary advocacy, trust review, inheritance disputes, and quiet forensic preparation for people whose relatives mistook emotion for weakness. I wasn't a lawyer, and I never pretended to be. I was something else. Translator, strategist, early warning system. Turns out there are many people who need someone to say, calmly, "No, you're not imagining this." And yes, there is a way to prove it. The work suited me better than the life I'd been raised toward. For years my parents assumed I would fold neatly into the Mercer orbit, board appointments, polished events, a marriage chosen from the right handful of surnames, some curated philanthropic niche to keep me visible but not powerful. Instead, I found I was good in the dark before the lights came on. Good with records, good with patterns, good at sitting across from stunned people and helping them separate loyalty from evidence. There was satisfaction in that I hadn't expected. Not triumph, usefulness. And I wasn't alone. The strangest friendship of my adult life began over chain of custody notes and bad cafe coffee. Claire and I kept in touch after the conference, partly because the case demanded it, then because it no longer did and neither of us stopped. At first we circled each other carefully, two women connected by the same man's dishonesty and too intelligent to pretend that made us instant sisters. But Claire had a dry, elegant sense of humor and a ruthless eye for pretense that I found increasingly restful. She also had no interest in being forgiven for her role in my father's life before she'd earned any version of respect. I appreciated that. One Friday afternoon in October, she dropped by my office with laminated pastries from a place on Court Street and stood by the window while I finished an email to a client in Boston. The office itself still smelled faintly of new paint and paper. Oak shelves, smoked glass lamps, textured wool rug, the soft ticking of the wall clock I'd inherited from my grandfather's study. "You won't believe who I just saw," Claire said. I looked up. That phrase usually means I absolutely will. "Your brother. At lunch. In Midtown. With two venture capital boys young enough to think loafers without socks count as confidence." I smiled despite myself. And he spent 40 minutes explaining that the family issue had been administrative noise and that he was repositioning. Claire leaned against the bookcase and took a sip of tea. Then his card was declined. I closed my laptop slowly. Was it really? It was glorious. That was my karma update for the week. We laughed longer than the story deserved, and there was something unexpectedly healing in that. Not cruelty, exactly, but release. Not because Owen suffered, because his mythology did. Julian became part of my life too, though in a different register. Less friend than trusted constant. We met every other month for lunch to discuss overlapping cases, and once in a while he would say something so dry it took me a second to realize he was joking. Priya sent impossible spreadsheets at 11 p.m. with cheerful notes like "found the laundering trail." Marisol occasionally texted photographs of recovered documents with captions that made me snort coffee. Crisis leaves behind odd little families. Not born ones. Built ones. 6 months after the conference at Barlow Finch, Brookhaven House was mine again, not as a museum to pain, and not as a permanent residence, but as a restored fact. I walked through it alone on a pale November afternoon while contractors finished minor repairs. Dust motes turned gold in the slanting sunlight of the front sitting room. The banister felt exactly the same beneath my hand. In the library, the first edition law books had been returned to their shelves. The antique clocks ticked again. I stood in the doorway of my grandmother's blue sitting room and let the stillness settle around me. I didn't cry. That surprises people when I tell them this part. They expect tears in old houses. They expect collapse. But grief had already done its work in me before I ever got the house back. What I felt there was something cleaner. Completion. I sold Brookhaven 9 months later, properly, publicly, at full value, to a preservation-minded couple who loved the leaded windows and promised not to gut the library. I kept the banister finial my grandfather once repaired himself, the silver tea service, the law books and the watch. The proceeds seeded Mercer Advisory and a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name for young women studying estate law and forensic accounting. That, more than anything, would have infuriated my parents, which was a pleasant bonus. A year after the first ambush, my mother sent one final message. No blame, no strategy, no feigned confusion. Just this: I never thought you would choose strangers over family. I read it once in the warm afternoon light of my office, my thumb resting against the edge of the phone. Then I set the phone face down on my desk and looked out at the street below, where people in coats hurried through the winter sun, carrying paper bags and grocery flowers, and all the small evidence of lives not arranged around power. She was wrong, of course. I hadn't chosen strangers over family. I had chosen truth over performance. And the people who remained after that choice were the closest thing to family I'd ever had. That evening, months later, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine while the sun went down behind Manhattan in a slow orange burn. The city changed color by degrees. First gold on the upper windows, then apricot along the river. Then that brief, impossible interval when the sky turns the color of peach skin over blue steel and the first office lights begin to appear one by one, like the day exhaling. The terracotta pots along the rail held rosemary and winter jasmine. Somewhere below, someone laughed on the sidewalk. A siren passed far off, softened by distance. Claire arrived just after 7, carrying a box from a bakery and wearing a camel wrap coat against the cold. She had cut her hair shorter by then to her jaw, and the change made her look lighter somehow. Younger, but not naive, freed at the edges. "I brought cake," she said as I opened the door. "Is this a crisis?" "It's Tuesday." "Fair." We ate thin slices of almond cake from small ceramic plates in my kitchen with the pendant lights low and the windows darkening behind us. Afterward we took our glasses outside. She leaned against the balcony rail and looked at the skyline. "It's strange," she said after a while. "I thought exposure would feel like death. Turns out it feels more like bad lighting." I laughed softly. That's because both of us were raised to believe being seen clearly was the worst thing that could happen. She tipped her head, considering that. "And now I think being misseen is worse." She lifted her glass, a little in acknowledgement. There was warmth between us by then. Not the false intimacy women are sometimes pushed into after surviving the same man, but something quieter and better. Chosen. Adult. The kind of friendship that doesn't need to erase history to outgrow it. We stood there in companionable silence while the last edge of sun slipped away and the orange glow deepened over the glass towers across the water. I thought about the woman I had been before all of this. So eager to preserve peace, so trained to mistake composure for compliance. I had not been weak. That's the part I'm careful about now. I was simply untested in the particular way wealth and family can conspire. I believed love and proximity offered protection. I believed being reasonable would keep unreasonable people from escalating. I believed that if I stayed honest, honesty would be reciprocated. I know better now. Not bitterly. Cleanly. The woman I am now still believes in dignity, but she no longer confuses it with silence. She still believes in family, but not as a blank check against accountability. She still prefers understatement, measured tones, careful exits. But now that restraint is backed by structure. By records. By the kind of self-trust you only earn after the floor gives way and you discover you can stand anyway. People like to call stories like mine revenge stories. I understand why. There is satisfaction in watching liars drown in paperwork. There is deep, almost musical pleasure in hearing a confident voice crack at exactly the moment evidence enters the room. There is beauty in proportional consequence. I won't pretend otherwise. But if I'm honest, what I feel now isn't revenge. It's gratitude with sharper edges. Not for what they did. Never that. But for what their betrayal forced me to become. My father taught me to read balance sheets before I was 14. My mother taught me that rooms have hierarchies, even when no one names them. Owen taught me, by accident, how entitlement sounds right before it implodes. Bernard taught me that titles don't protect people from cowardice. And my grandfather, my wise, impossible, infuriating grandfather, taught me the only lesson that turned out to matter. Never surrender control of your life to people who benefit from your confusion. So yes, in the privacy of my own mind, I thank them sometimes. I thank them for underestimating me. I thank them for believing affection made me blind. I thank them for assuming calm meant passive. Without their greed, I might have stayed decorative in the house they built. Without their fraud, I might never have discovered how much steadier I am under pressure than any of them. Without their ambush, I might never have found my work, my people, or this hard-won peace standing here in the amber hush of evening with city lights flickering on below me. Claire raised her glass. To inconvenient women. I smiled and touched my glass to hers. To records, I said. She laughed. That too. We drank. The night settled in around us, velvet dark between the buildings, the air carrying that clean winter bite that makes every warm room feel earned. Somewhere behind us my phone lit up on the kitchen counter with a message I had no intention of reading until morning, if ever. The old version of me would have gone to check. Would have wondered if this was the one note that changed something. The one apology. The one plea. The one softening. The woman I am now let it glow and fade without moving. Because closure, I learned, is not a letter. It is not a confession. It is not hearing the right person finally say the right thing too late. Closure is a structure you build in yourself, brick by brick, document by document, boundary by boundary, until the life on the other side of betrayal feels larger than the betrayal itself. And that is the real ending of the story. Not the brochure on the mahogany table. Not the forged signature. Not the conference room with its leather chairs and polished wood and collapsing lies. Not even the moment my parents signed their power away under warm recessed lights. The real ending is this. The orange glow on the glass, the quiet weight of a watch on my wrist, the taste of almond cake and red wine, the sound of my own breath steady in the cold evening air, and the knowledge that what they tried to take from me was never as valuable as what they accidentally gave me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making people pay. It's about building a life they can never touch again. And if there's any truth worth keeping from what happened, it's that one. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about the ruin you leave behind. It's about the peace you make untouchable,